What's going on, YouTube? Today we're talking about Charted Visual Flight Procedures, or CVFPs for short. A charted visual flight procedure is not all that much different than a normal visual approach. They are more restrictive in terms of weather and the courses to fly, but are key in reducing noise pollution in sensitive areas and standardizing traffic in busy airspaces. If you haven't already, go check out my video on how to fly visual approaches. That'll give you a good foundation to understand what's going on in this video. If you have already seen that video, then in this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about flying a charted visual flight procedure. Charted visual flight procedures are a subcategory of visual approach procedures. Charted visual flight procedures are made in order to standardize the flow of traffic down a specific approach corridor. These procedures are particularly designed with jet traffic in mind and are typically produced to reduce noise pollution around noise-sensitive areas. An approach that comes to mind is the Roaring Fork visual to runway 15 at Aspen. This approach has you flying in and around a ton of wilderness areas, national parks, and recreational areas. Another reason why an airport manager would publish a charted visual approach procedure is to standardize traffic in congested and busy airspace. Approaches that come to mind include the River Visual to runway 19 in DC. This approach has you flying in from the north over the Potomac River through the highly congested Class Bravo airspace of Washington, DC. This approach standardizes traffic to keep them out of the sensitive, prohibited areas of the Naval Observatory and the National Mall. Another approach that comes to mind is the Expressway Visual to runway 31 at LaGuardia, up in New York. This approach standardizes traffic coming in from the south into the New York Class Bravo airspace, has them go up the Long Island Expressway, turning around Citi Field, and then flying into runway 31. When it comes to weather, charted visual flight procedures are typically more restrictive than just straight up visual approaches. ATC can't even clear you a CVFP unless the ceiling is at least 500 feet above the min vectoring altitude and the visibility is 3 statute miles or greater, or the charted approach mins, whichever is greater. On the pilot side, these approaches differ from visual approaches because the pilot doesn't have to see the airfield, but rather they just have to see a charted visual landmark that's on that approach in order to commence the approach itself. Especially flying in somewhere like Aspen, the charted visual flight procedure is more safe than a straight up visual approach because the ceiling and viz for the charted procedure is 6010, whereas a straight up visual approach is just 1003. Similar to a standard visual approach where the pilot needs to either see the airfield or traffic to follow in order to be cleared the approach, a charted visual approach procedure requires a pilot to declare that they either have preceding traffic in sight or a charted visual landmark which allows them to proceed with the approach. Once cleared the approach, the only requirements are to remain clear of clouds, or VMC, and to adhere to any hard altitudes that are set in the approach plate itself. Just like standard visual approaches, there is no missed approach procedure. If you have to execute a go-around, you should expect to look to tower in order to give you further instructions to circle back and land, or coordinate with approach control in order to get you back around to try the landing again. Reading the plate for a CVFP is pretty similar to a standard instrument approach procedure with a couple caveats. At the top right will be the official airfield name, the 3-letter identifier, and then below that will be the city in which the airfield is located. To the left of that will be the actual approach name. So in this case, this is the Mount Vernon Visual to runway 1. Now here's the first part of the approach plate that differs significantly from traditional approach plates, is that all the frequencies are on the top left, much like you'd see in an airport diagram. In all my research for this video, I couldn't find an official reason for this, but my best guess is that it maximizes space to actually depict landmarks and ground features for the visual approach in the plan view. Some charts will include a scale in nautical miles if the chart is actually drawn to scale. Otherwise, the chart has to have chart not to scale somewhere in the plan view. Beneath the plan view is the notes section, where they'll have any kind of special instructions for that particular approach that you need to adhere to. If anything's going to get you in trouble, it's going to be this section. Every single charted visual flight procedure has unique notes to that specific approach. The notes can cover anything from radio calls to visual landmarks in sight to what nav aids you can use to start one part of the approach before you transition to a visual part of the approach. One specific approach that comes to mind is the expressway visual to runway 31 at LaGuardia in New York. The notes say, when clear the approach to runway 31 while on the LaGuardia VOR radial 225, cross the Dials intersection at 2,500 feet or above. Turn right at Dials heading 085 degrees and ascend to runway 31 via Long Island Expressway and Flushing Meadow Park. Use the LaGuardia runway 4 localizer for course guidance when LaGuardia VOR is not available. Holy yikes. None of that is in the profile view. So if you think you can just pull up this approach plate and just fly what's on the profile view, that's not going to happen. There's no depiction of hard altitudes. There's no depiction of using the localizer in case the VOR is out of service. And there's no depiction of where they want you to descend for this approach. Another thing to note is that procedures will not be authorized at night if any of the visual landmarks cannot be seen at night. This is particularly scary considering the approach at Aspen is almost entirely navigating off of different mountain peaks. When it comes to the actual profile view, information isn't exactly organized in a standardized way. Information is just put there wherever it's convenient to work around the different charted landmarks. Two bits of information that every single approach will have is the vertical guidance and the weather minimums. One thing to note about vertical guidance is that every single charted visual flight procedure will have some form of vertical guidance, whether it be visual, instrument, or both. That is a basic legal requirement in order to allow you to fly a charted visual approach procedure. You're still legal to fly one of these approaches even if the vertical guidance is out, but you must be notified that the vertical guidance is unserviceable. Otherwise, all standard procedures for instrument approach plates apply to the profile view of a charted visual approach procedure, with the exception that high altitude terrain is not shaded in brown. And there you go. That is everything you need to know about charted visual flight procedures. They are pretty rare, but I will say that I have not seen a charted visual flight procedure that doesn't look like an absolutely beautiful scenic approach to fly. So hopefully one day soon I'll fly one myself and I'll let you guys know how it goes. Once again, we're at that part of the video. If you've made it this far, you obviously like the video, so please drop a like. If you haven't already subscribed and you're listening to this, please subscribe. Share this video with whoever you think needs to see it, and leave a comment on whether or not you've flown an actual charted visual flight procedure or what the most beautiful approach you've ever flown was. Until next time, I will see you later.